Imagine you're watching an action movie late at night. You turn the volume up to hear the dialogue, but then the action starts and it becomes too loud. You reach for the remote to turn the volume down so you don't wake everybody up. Then the action sequence ends and you have to turn it back up again. Some TV receivers can take care of this for you. They can turn the volume down automatically when things get loud. They do this by using a compressor. Compressor is a signal processor that constantly listens to the audio on a track and turns the volume down when the signal on that track passes a threshold. Now, the action movie analogy is easy to understand, but when do we need a compressor in mixing? For example, imagine you recorded a singer who moves a lot while recording. The volume on that track will change significantly as she moves closer to and away from the microphone. Or here's another typical scenario. You recorded electric bass, but some notes stick out and some notes are barely audible. Maybe the player was inconsistent. Maybe the pickups were misaligned. Maybe the strings were bad. Who knows? Sometimes we want to use compressors to bring out the detail in a recording. By turning down the loud parts, a compressor allows us to raise the overall volume of a track, so details that were too quiet now become audible. This is how electric guitars seem to sustain a note for much longer than acoustic guitars. Normally, a guitar has a strong attack, then the sound decays quickly. But if you compress the attack and turn up the volume, that decay will linger for a much longer time period, and it will sound like the note is sustaining for much longer. And finally, sometimes we use a compressor because we want the sound of a compressor. Yes, although the process is purely mathematical, compressors have their own sonic signatures. This is even more true for analog compressors that have a certain character, and for software modeling of those analog compressors. We use them because we want their sonic color on that particular track. This is subjective and a matter of taste. You will develop your own taste over time and decide if you like this analog character in your mixes or not. As a matter of fact, the compressor sound has become standard for some genres of music and is a prerequisite, including most types of pop, rock, hip-hop, and EDM. So how do we actually use a compressor? Well, on most compressors, there's a threshold setting. This lets you set the level at which the compressor will start turning down the volume. So going back to our late night movie analogy, below the threshold is dialogue, above the threshold is action. You want to set this so that it leaves the audio alone during dialogue and turns it down during action scenes. Back in the first section of this course, we said that in digital audio, total silence is represented by -infinity and the loudest possible amplitude is represented by 0 decibels. So on a scale of -infinity to 0, you set this to tell the compressor when it should start compressing. Thankfully, most compressors have a gain reduction indicator that shows you if and when they are compressing and how much. If the track is playing and you see no activity here, just bring the threshold down so you see it kick in during the louder parts of the track. Now the compressor knows when it should kick in, but how much should it compress? We set that by the ratio parameter. Ratio tells the compressor how much it should compress the signal above the threshold. Here's an example. Let's say your threshold is at -20 dB. If at a given moment the level at the compressor's input is -12 dB, this means that the signal is exceeding the threshold by 8 decibels. If your ratio is set to 2, the compressor will compress this by a ratio of 2 to 1. That will bring it down to 4 decibels. So at the output of the compressor, we will have -16 decibels. If your ratio is set to 4, the compressor will compress it by a ratio of 4 to 1. That will bring it down to 2 decibels. So at the output of the compressor, we will have -18 decibels. If your ratio is set to 8, the compressor will compress it by a ratio of 8 to 1. That will bring it down to 1 decibel. So at the output of the compressor, we will have -19 decibels. Now when we compress the signal, naturally it will become quieter. So in order to compensate for that loss in volume, we use the make-up or gain control. This is how a compressor can bring out the details in a recording or make a guitar note sustain for much longer. There are two more important parameters commonly found on most compressors: attack and release. Attack tells the compressor how fast it should start compressing once the signal passes the threshold. Release tells it how soon to let go of compressing once the signal has gone below the threshold. The analysis setting is a beautiful feature not found on many compressors. If you set this to peak, it will only observe peak values and react when they pass the threshold. If you set it to RMS, it will observe the average level of the signal and react when the average level passes the threshold. Now let's put all this in context. Let's say you have a funk guitar track. The attacks are strong, which is typical in this genre, and there is also some reverb and delay. Let me add a compressor to this. This is the default setting of the compressor that comes with Cubase. I only adjusted the makeup gain so you won't notice any change in volume. Listen as I go back and forth between compressed and original signal. This is the bypass button. When it's dark, the compressor is active. When it's yellow, the compressor is in bypass. Here we go. Now let's say I want to make the attacks smoother. I can set the attack time to as short as it will go, and the release time too, and set the analysis knob to peak. Now I'm telling the compressor to react as soon as it detects a peak and release as soon as it can. Check this out. See how the attacks are now much softer and the reverb became much more prominent? If I increase the ratio, it will become even more obvious. Now let's try the opposite. Set a longer attack time. This will tell the compressor to wait for a while before starting to compress. It will allow the attacks to pass through and compress the reverb. Take a listen. This compressor also has a dry-wet mix control, which lets us mix the compressed signal with the original dry signal. That's an excellent way of applying parallel compression. We will talk about parallel compression, sidechain compression, and other aspects of using a compressor in detail in the following sections.